I hope everybody is eating something tasty. We can't be together for lunch, but in Judaism, when people are gathered to eat and study Torah, it's one of the highest, mitzvot per minute activities you can engage in. So there are so many blessings associated with eating, and there are blessings associated with the study of Torah, as well as the blessing of Torah, so studying Torah. So when you sit down with other people at a table to discuss Torah, it is just a treasure trove of mitzvot. So I hope everybody's having a good lunch. I'm going to start with the blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Let's together we say, Amen.
Amen.
And the topic for today's study session is New Year's. So who's been looking forward to this new year?
Yes.
Looking
Pretty
forward
much everybody.
2020.
For those of you on Facebook, every once in a while it pops up and it shows you a picture of what you were doing last year at this time.
Yeah.
And even, my phone pops up memories of things, and it's about to get really sad. Not that it hasn't been sad already, but, last year my whole family came in town for Mardi Gras, and we went to all the parades, and we were getting ready for Jazz Fest, and I went to watch Zion debut at the Smoothie King Center, and all these wonderful things that we just don't get to do this year. So, just for that alone, it's how much our world has changed has been pretty shocking. So, in hopes for a better new year, we are going to study New Year's. And how many people, when is Jewish New Year's?
September.
September, October. So we're talking about Rosh Hashanah
No,
here.
October we're free.
So interestingly enough, there are 4 separate Jewish New Years throughout the year. Rosh Hashanah is one of them. And we are going to go through each of the 4 Jewish New Years because New Year number 2 is coming up this month. So in Judaism, if you wanted to get a head start on 2021, or in our case, 5781, we were able to jump forward a couple months ago. And, things have been mildly better since then. There's a vaccine and things are trending right, hopefully. So first and foremost, everybody said New Year's because Rosh Hashanah literally means the head of the year. It's when we say Shana Tova, which means Happy New Year. It is what we've all grown up knowing and understanding as our new year. So what exactly makes Rosh Hashanah New Year's? There are some very obvious answers and some not so obvious answers.
The reading of the Torah you started in the beginning.
Yeah, we've reached the end of our Torah cycle. We're about to go to the beginning. Very true. But actually, that's there's a chicken and egg thing there. We do that because it's the new year. And so Yvonne in the chat mentions that the year changes. Very simply, yes. What is New Year's to us in America? It's when we go from 2020 to 2021. Tishrei, the Hebrew month of Tishrei, is when we go from 5780 to 5781. Very simply, it's when the year turns over, and our rabbis point out that this is what they call the anniversary of creation. That's a very fancy way, the anniversary of creation. Every one of us has an anniversary of our creation. What do we call that?
Birthday.
Birthday, yeah. Very simply, this is the world's birthday, according to our Talmud. The Torah describes it as a day when the horn is sounded. That's where the shofar tradition comes from. And the rabbis tell us that Tishrei is considered the new year in relation to the seasons. The world was created in Tishrei, And creation is really the focus of the holiday of Rosh Hashanah. That's why we read the creation story along with the binding of Isaac, which is where we get the ram's horn. But this is when the year turns over. We eat round challah, we eat apples and honey, and it's the world's birthday. Now, the idea of Tishrei being a new year is a little strange if you know how the Hebrew months are counted. So Tishrei is not the first month on the Jewish calendar. It is the 7th month on the Jewish calendar. So this would be kind of like if we celebrated New Year's in July. So the way to understand that, was anybody here born on January 1st? Okay, my daughter was born on January 2nd. She's close. So whenever your birthday is your anniversary of creation. But January 1st is still the first of the month. Sorry about that. So it's not the beginning of the calendar. It's not January 1st. It's just the Earth's birthday. Makes sense? Any questions so far? This might get a little confusing as we go. It's also in Judaism how they measured how long, say, King David was king, or how long somebody reigned over the ancient kingdom of Israel. The years for them began on Rosh Hashanah. In addition, who has heard of sabbatical and jubilee?
Mhm.
So there was at the end of every 7 sets of 7-year cycles in the Torah, all of the land would revert back to its original owner. So how do you know when the land had been in another ownership for 50 years? You count the years from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. So every 50th year, following 7 cycles of 7, all land would get returned as of Rosh Hashanah. That would be the day when it's kind of like the fiscal year of Judaism. Any questions on Rosh Hashanah? I think everybody knows Rosh Hashanah pretty well. That's the most. Actually, there's one new year that I think y'all are going to know more than Rosh Hashanah, but you may not know it's a new year. Any questions on the Rosh? Okay. Who knows what the next Jewish New Year is?
Oh, good. Where?
Forgot. I feel like I knew this, but I forgot.
This is the one that's coming up this month. I think Rachel's got a Jewish calendar on the wall. Tu B'Shvat, exactly.
Oh, Tu B'Shvat.
Yeah, and Yvonne got it in the chat too. And given that there's a delay in when the chat gets in, I think you probably got it right at about the same time. So Tu B'Shvat is a new year, and it's a new year for a specific thing. What's it a new year for?
Isn't this the one for the new year for the earth, for the trees and
For the trees.
Harvest? The trees?
The trees.
If they,
Now, in modern Judaism, Tu B'Shvat has become kind of like an Arbor Day, and it's similar in that it is for the trees, but it serves an actual purpose. Who knows about the laws regarding eating fruit from trees? Everybody know, are we allowed to eat any fruit from any tree?
no.
I never
Well-
thought of that.
Definitely, there's a tree in the Garden of Eden we weren't supposed to eat from.
Apple?
So there's actually, according to the Torah, there's a certain age. So what Ivana said, you have to wait 15 years. You're right, you have to wait. It's not quite 15 years. But you have to wait 3 years to be able to eat the fruit from a tree. Why is that? Why is there a 3-year wait on eating fruit from a tree?
I don't know.
I was actually just watching. I happened to come across a video on how tequila is made. I don't know why I got in one of those endless internet things where I see something interesting and then I want to know how something else works. And they talk about how these plants have to grow for a certain period of time before they can be harvested. So what happens to something growing from the earth over time? What is it? What changes throughout time?
Matures, it gets bigger, stronger.
Yeah, it gets bigger, gets stronger. And Yvonne says the same thing. When fruit is good and ready to eat, yeah, it has to ripen for one thing. But also, plants, if they're harvested too early, are less likely to produce fruit in the next year. They are nourished by the earth, and if they have to take more nourishment from the earth because they're pruned too early, then it inhibits their growth. Now, what does Tu B'Shvat have to do with this? Well, let's say you moved into a new house and there's a lemon tree there, and you're following Jewish law that says you can't eat until the 3rd year, but you have no idea when this lemon tree was planted. So what you do is the next time you hit Tu B'Shvat, that tree turns 1 year old. And then next Tu B'Shvat, it's 2, and then the following Tu B'Shvat, it is 3. And then you can eat from it. Now, none of this is relevant anymore because this only applies to trees in the land of Israel. Well, I guess it's not relevant to us here in America, which is why actually the Reform movement really brought Tu B'Shvat to America and kind of made it what it is today. Who has ever been to a Tu B'Shvat Seder? They're pretty fun. It's kind of like a Passover Seder. It's modeled after the Passover Seder, but instead of, brisket and chopped liver, you have fruit and nuts and, the 7 species of grains and wine. You actually, to symbolize the turning of seasons from one Tu B'Shvat to the other, you, maybe it's backwards. You start with a white wine representing winter, and then you add a tinge of red for spring, and then you have red with a tinge of white for summer, and then you have just plain red for fall. So throughout the Tu B'Shvat Seder, you are drinking your 4 cups of wine just like we would do at Passover. All of this is a modern invention. There's nothing Talmudic that tells us to do a Tu B'Shvat Seder, but it's something that came out of American Judaism, where we in this country, and probably with a desire to connect to the state of Israel, decided we wanted to observe Tu B'Shvat and turn it into this wonderful, very, very delicious and fun holiday.
Do the secular Jews in Israel follow the law about not eating from a tree for 3 years?
Do the secular Jews? Good question. I think so, but they do it in the same way, in what I call the Shabbat elevator model of following. They find loopholes. Mm-hmm. So one thing that is still followed is the year called Shemitah, and I was actually in Israel during the Shemitah year. So every 7th year, you're not supposed to till the land. So during that 7th year, what Jews will do is they will sell their land for a penny to a non-Jew for the year and buy it back for a penny at the end of the year so they can still keep working the land.
Ooh, that's cheating.
Yeah, it's cheating. Just like a Shabbat elevator is cheating, just like a Shabbos goy is cheating. It's cheating. You might as well just not fulfill the law. But yeah, it's still done to an extent, and I think I think this is a law. A lot of times in Judaism, we wonder whether laws came from practice or whether practice gave us laws. So there are things like, circumcision on the 8th day. In ancient practice, that was the most healthy day to do it. So you can imagine there was probably some trial and error before then, and even if you read modern books about mourning practices, they largely advise a mourning structure that mimics what we do in Judaism. So part of being around for as long as we've been around is we have time-tested practices that we tweaked until they became something that worked. So my guess is this practice probably came from experience, knowing when exactly to harvest these trees. But it's a delicious practice. And if Rachel reminds me, next year I'll come around this time and we'll do a Tu B'Shvat Seder as the Lunch and Learn.
That would be nice.
Oh, more nice.
But I have 3 Zoom meetings after this one, so if you don't remind me, there's no way it's going to stay in my brain.
All right. I will somehow make a note to myself about that.
In mysticism, it's it's a kind of a symbol of rebirth, and thanks, Yvonne. Yvonne's going to remind me too.
Yes.
Really, only somebody just has to remind me when I'm near my calendar, so I can tell Leslie to remind me. In Israel, Tu B'Shvat, and the mystics say this is really about redemption of the land, and it has kind of tilted towards an environmental message, and for good reason. It's hard to appreciate the fruit of the earth without promoting an environment that nourishes the fruit of the earth. And about 10 years ago, I realized how many pieces of paper I printed for every Tu B'Shvat Seder and went to a PowerPoint projected virtual Tu B'Shvat Seder. So that's what I'll bring next year, if Rachel reminds me.
Okay.
Or Yvonne, if Yvonne reminds me too. And God willing, we're allowed to be in a room and share food and all that stuff. But I'm assuming the best. All right. So we had Tishrei, we had Rosh Hashanah, which is in the fall. We had Tu B'Shvat, which is in the winter, and our next New Year is going to be in the spring. Who wants to guess what that is?
Passover?
Passover.
I'm like,
So Passover
Louis,
is...
are all in the fall.
What's that?
I was thinking of all the fall holidays, and I'm like, Passover.
So I mentioned that Tishrei is the 7th month of the year. You're emailing us, Leslie, right now. Wonderful. Tishrei is the 7th month when Rosh Hashanah is. The first month of the calendar is the month of Nisan, and that's when Passover takes place. So the calendar goes from month 12 to month 1 at Nisan, and it's very significant, the timing of this, and the significance is biblical, and then it also becomes important to our modern calendar. So what happens, what's the holiday right before Passover? It's one that is surprisingly not as big in New Orleans as I thought it would be, but only because I think people are Mardi Gras out. Purim. Yeah. So we come off some pretty heavy holidays. After the high holidays, which are solemn, we have stories of redemption like Hanukkah, and then Purim is one of the few holidays which is purely festive. In fact, it's seen as the exact opposite of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is about refraining from the physical, and Purim is about indulgence. So right from Purim, and by the way, sometimes our calendar has a leap year where we add a whole second month to keep our holidays in the right times of the year. When we do that, the month we add is another month of Adar. So we take our happiest month and we do it twice. It's a rare bit of optimism from our ancestors who say, if we're going to have to do something twice, let's pick a happy thing. They could have made Yom Kippur twice, and it sounds like more likely from our past. But the first of Nisan is when we go from, biblically speaking, let's see. Yeah, so Yvonne was saying Purim was last time we were all together before we shut down. That's right. That was fun, and I miss those times. Purim, so Passover, it does represent something new for our people, and if you go through the biblical story of our people, something changes from, I would say, Joseph to Moses, and there's a big difference in Judaism from that point, which is when God spoke to Abraham one-on-one. God spoke to Isaac and Jacob and Sarah and Rachel and Leah. God spoke to Joseph. God spoke to Moses. And then all of a sudden, we have Mount Sinai. And what happens for the first time at Mount Sinai?
The commandments.
The commandments. And the commandments were given to Moses, but spoken to the entire people of Israel. And this is when the covenant is made. This is when Judaism goes from a religion between individuals and God to a religion between the people of Israel, the Hebrew people, and God. This is the beginning of Judaism as a organized religion, or you might say the beginning of the people Israel as a people, as a nation. So this is the beginning of the calendar, and Passover is seen as the beginning of the story of Judaism. Abraham might be the beginning of the story of a Jewish person, and Judaism, Jewish people, but Passover is the beginning of Judaism as a people, as a religion. Anybody know what modern Israeli holidays are right after Passover?
Oh, it's isn't it Independence and Yom HaShoah?
Yeah, in a very specific order. So Yom HaShoah is first, and it's this. They picked the day of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising for Yom HaShoah, and then there is Yom HaZikaron, which is the memorial day for Jewish soldiers, and after that is Yom HaAtzmaut, which is Israeli Independence Day, and all of this follows Passover. So the modern state of Israel kind of took this idea from our ancestors, as they scheduled from Purim to Passover, from attempts of destruction to redemption, and then to ultimately to Torah. In modern Israel, they did the same thing. They didn't go from Yom Kippur to Yom HaAtzmaut. They chose very specifically to do these things during the spring, and of course, the Declaration of Independence, that was established by the founders, but those holidays leading up to it, they meant to teach us that there's a progression from the destruction of the Shoah to the sacrifice of the soldiers to the celebration of freedom. Any questions on that one?
Not yet.
All right, the fourth and final Jewish New Year is one that I would be shocked if anybody here had ever heard of. Does anybody know what the fourth Jewish New Year is? It is the most useless of our Jewish New Years. So we had a New Year for the seasons, that's Rosh Hashanah. We had a New Year for the plants, the fruits, that's Tu B'Shvat. We have a New Year for our people when we become a people in the spring. What's the last significant part of ancient Judaism that we haven't talked about yet? Yvonne's got it.
Animals.
Mm-hmm. Now, this isn't your puppy dog's birthday. It's much darker than that. What did we used to do with animals in the Bible?
Slaughter them.
Sacrifice them.
So the first month of Elul, which is not too far before Rosh Hashanah. Elul is the month right before Passover. That was the day that was dedicated for the tithing of cattle. The tithing of cattle had to be made from cattle born in that same fiscal year between Elul 1 last year and Elul 1 this year. Now, why is this not important to us today in the slightest? Well, Tu B'Shvat, we could still theoretically practice because we still grow trees in Israel. What about the slaughtering of cattle? Could we still do that?
No.
We can't. Why can't we do that even if we wanted to?
The butcher does it.
Butcher does
The butcher does it.
So yes, we can still slaughter and eat cattle, but not for religious purposes. We can't offer sacrifices anymore. This is the law that changed Judaism to the Judaism we know of today. The Torah is very clear that animal sacrifices can only happen in one place in the world, and that's at the temple in Jerusalem. And it's not even at the spot of the temple. When the Maccabees recaptured the temple, they didn't go right to offering sacrifices. They had to dedicate the space as a place of worship before they could reinstitute the temple practices. So, you couldn't go up to the Temple Mount now and sacrifice a cow. It has to be established as God's earthly dwelling place. Now, unlike other parts of Judaism, like the Passover Seder, for example, it doesn't say you have to be in Jerusalem to do the Seder. It says, you do it where you are. You can do it at home. You can do it outside, wherever. And sacrifices that used to be done in biblical times evolved into prayer. So every prayer that we do in our Siddur, in our prayer book, is based on a sacrifice we used to do back in the old days. Our rabbis of the Talmud said, we can't sacrifice a bird for peace, so we'll say Shalom Rav instead. Prayer became that substitute for us. Now, there's a, tricky, not tricky, but you can't even, let's say the Israeli army decides they're going to take over the Temple Mount and rebuild the temple. You still couldn't do sacrifices there because according to our tradition, the third temple will only be built by the Messiah in the Messianic age. And theoretically, in the Messianic age, the purpose of the sacrifice is to communicate with God, but in the Messianic age, we are all in communication with God naturally. So sacrifice wouldn't even be needed. So there is no scenario when an animal could be sacrificed in Judaism ever again in human existence. It's pretty interesting. There aren't that many things in our tradition that are just gone forever, but that is one of them. Now, Elul, whereas it used to be this tithing process where there were animal sacrifices, what do we do in the month of Elul now. So Elul is the month right before Rosh Hashanah, and it is an entire month dedicated to reflection. This is when we observe Slichot, that kind of official beginning of the high holiday season. It's when we're commanded to look inward. There's a beautiful midrash. The letters of Elul, Aleph Lamed, Vav Lamed, stand for the words Ani Ledodi Vedodi Li. I am my beloved's, my beloved is mine. And that is God speaking to us. That this is the time when we begin that process of connecting with God, which our tradition tells us begins with connecting with one another. So in just a few weeks, I think Tu B'Shvat is on the 26th.
28th.
27th, 28th. Starts on the evening of 27th, 28th. So mark the day on the calendar. It's a Wednesday, Thursday, and you can't really gather with anybody for it. But if you want to acknowledge the new year, get some pomegranate seeds if they're in season, drink some wine, have a very heart-healthy day of fruit and wine.
We are having a cooking class on the 27th with Phyllis's son, Iman, to make some kind of harvesty type food.
Wonderful.
I'll tell everyone to have some wine with
Have some wine with it.
It's at 11 o'clock.
Plant a tree in Israel. Plant a tree here. Do something to make the earth a little healthier on that day. And it's a really wonderful holiday. And there's some, we're coming around to having some good songs with Tu B'Shvat also, but they're all kind of children's songs, and it will be stuck in your head forever. And now I have
still
two kids.
remember mine from Hebrew school.
And now that I have two kids at the Jewish day school, I'm counting down the days until they come home singing the I'm a Tree song or the Blowing in the Wind song. I'm looking forward to it.
We still like to sing the kids' Passover songs at our Seder.
They're great. The songs don't improve or get any better over the years. It's the nostalgic ones that grow better over time.
When I worked at the Uptown Shea, we always planted a tree on Jefferson Avenue to celebrate. That's from Yvonne. Now you'd probably be fined if you planted a tree.
Yeah, I think that my wife is working with the day school to plant trees. I think in City Park for Tu B'Shvat. So it's really nice, and Israel is the only country that has more trees now than it did 100 years ago. And if you go to Israel and you look out over just forests and forests of pine trees, you know that pine trees don't grow naturally there. Those are all planted by, giving $1 when a new baby's born. And whenever I take people to a JNF forest, I tell them to go find their tree, the one that was planted for them when they were born. I said, you'll know it because it'll look like you.
Old.
And everybody finds it.
Yeah,
Now, that's my tree. It stands the way I stand. And that tree looks a little skeptical, and I'm kind of scared. Everybody finds their tree. Any questions? Anything y'all want to talk about? That's really the end of my agenda.
I, for one, am looking forward to the new year. In memory of a person was done all the time for Israel. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember that growing up, that's what everyone did at Tu B'Shvat. You donated
Plant a tree.
a tree and
Yep.
It's amazing what we've done. And the connection between American Jews and Israel is eternal. I mean, those trees are growing and changing the landscape and making the desert bloom. It's wonderful.
You know, you think about successful campaigns. That really was a very successful campaign. I wonder who started that, because it could have been plant a tree in your neighborhood, in your backyard. But they started this campaign for plant a tree in Israel, and it was so strong for so many years. And look at the difference that it made.
Yeah, I would guess that. So in early Zionism, in the first Aliyot to the land of Israel, the land that they were able to purchase was the barren desert land that nobody wanted. So the need was there right off the bat. You know, the people weren't selling land that was fertile and growing. You know, Tel Aviv was just one big vast desert. So the need was certainly there. And they've used there's a great story. I think it was during I want to say the Yom Kippur War. I have to double check, but there was a spy who infiltrated the Syrian army, and when they were invading in northern Israel, the land there was swampy. It was marshy, kind of like here. So the spy suggested that they plant eucalyptus trees, not only so they could hide under, but so they could soak up the water. So the Syrian army planted eucalyptus trees wherever their troops were hiding, and the Israeli army just knew to bomb the eucalyptus trees.
Not a successful campaign.
I mean, success not for the trees, but for. And there's and this story is kind of dark, but I'll share it anyway. But there was a soldier who and I think this is a true story. If not, it's a legend that it has become true. But there was a soldier who used to collect seeds as he was defending Israel. Wherever he went, he would take a seed, and he kept them in the pocket of his uniform. And he was killed in battle, and the place where he was buried, a little oasis grew from the seeds that he had been carrying with him.
That's a nice
Johnny.
Yeah, when I was an assistant rabbi in Philadelphia, the senior rabbi told that story at a family Shabbat. He came back. I said, "Dude, that was a dark story for children." All right, my friends. Well, thanks for inviting me to lunch and learn with y'all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for teaching us.
And next year,
Anytime you need me, just reach out, and I hope to see everybody soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next month, we have Rabbi Lexi from Gates of Prayer also. So that will be good as well.
Oh, she's wonderful. Yeah.
She is. She's wonderful.
I will be well. Happy New Year. And
Happy
if this year is not good, just wait till January 27th and start a new year, and hopefully that one will be good.
we have a
Stay
lot
safe.
of chances.
I take care of